Lesson 17, Section 1. In this grammar presentation, we will be looking at the perfect tense, how to form it, and what it means. These here are the tenses we have looked at so far in the normal text, and in the gray, the ones we haven't looked at yet. We're almost to the end here. We're going to look today at the present perfect, as it's known in English, and as it's known in Greek, the perfect. In English, the present perfect is used to describe two things. It has two primary uses. The first, past actions with results that are relevant to the present. For instance, I have gotten you a ticket, so now you can go. Or perhaps, so now you don't have to get a ticket yourself. It's describing a past action. This getting of the ticket did happen in the past. Maybe I got it yesterday, maybe I got it a week ago. But the results of that past action are relevant to the present. What we're going to do now or in the future is a result of this past action. So we use the present perfect in English in describing an action like this. And in English, the present perfect is formed fairly straightforwardly. We have our helping verb, have, and that's really our main verb that we're going to conjugate there. And then we have the past participle of the verb that we're really interested in, which is in this case, get. So I have gotten would be the way we form the present perfect of the verb get in English. We also use the present perfect to describe past actions continuing into the present. Actions that began in the past but are still ongoing. For instance, we have waited for days, and maybe now we're worried. Or more importantly, maybe we're still waiting. We're still waiting. That waiting did begin in the past action, but it has continued into the present. And here we might use the present perfect in English. By contrast, the simple past describes a past action whose results are not necessarily relevant to the present, or an action that's not continuing into the present. For instance, we waited for days. Maybe then we were rescued. This is an action that took place in the past, just as the I have gotten you a ticket, but it is completed, and also it's not relevant to the present. We're not still worried that we're not going to get rescued because we waited and then we were rescued. This is the simple past and how it's different from the present perfect. Let's look at how to form the perfect tense in Greek. Its uses are very similar. There will be one or two differences, but we'll address those after we look at formation. Depending on the nature of the verb, the perfect tense in Greek is formed in several steps. First, what is called reduplication of initial consonants. For instance, let's take a look at our verb pao, I stop, and we're going to drop our omega as usual to get our present stem. And then we're going to what is called reduplicate that initial consonant pi. And it basically just means repeating it and then adding, in this case, a little epsilon in between. Pi on their own would be impossible to pronounce, so we add the epsilon in there to give it its distinct articulation. Now with a verb like pelga, it's a little different because while we do have, we'll get our stem, we do have our initial consonant there, phi. That consonant is an aspirated consonant. It's basically a pi with a rough breathing. And to get that, to reduplicate that, we're not going to add a second phi. We're going to restore that aspirated consonant to its original unaspirated form, the pi. So pepog rather than pepog, if you can hear the difference. Now the second step to form the perfect in Greek is augmentation of verbs that start with vowels. This is what we do with a different kind of verb than the ones we just looked at. So for instance, heuriska, I find, which we get heureka, I have found, eureka from. We'll look at that in just a bit. To get, we're going to drop our omega, and not just that, we're going to have in the perfect tense of this verb a bit of a stem change, a major stem change. The perfect is kind of irregular. We're going to see weird things happening sometimes in the perfect that we could not predict. So just take this on faith for the moment. Now, what we have here at the beginning of this verb is this heu. We do not have an initial consonant. We have a vowel or a diphthong sort of sound. What happens to this is the same thing basically that happens in the imperfect. When we have a verb that starts with a vowel or diphthong, we lengthen the vowel or diphthong. And the lengthened version of epsilon upsilon is eta upsilon. So rather than reduplicating anything, in a sense this is reduplicating, it's lengthening that initial sound. So depending on the nature of the verb we're talking about, we're either going to reduplicate the initial consonant or lengthen or augment that initial vowel or diphthong. Now, the final, not the final step, second to last step, the addition of kappa to vowel stem verbs. That is, if one of these verbs has a ends in a vowel with its stem, for instance, pepau ends in a vowel or diphthong, au, we're going to add kappa to it. It's also going to happen with the third verb here on the list. We're going to add kappa in both of these places. And finally, the last step, we're going to add our perfect endings, which are almost identical to our aorist endings, our aorist indicative endings. So we've got pepauk, pepaug, and then heurek. And to form the rest of the perfect, we just add our endings. So let's look at the perfect stem here of pau. We've got pepauk, the reduplicated initial consonant, plus the perfect stem. And let's compare the aorist here, epausa, I stopped, epausas, you stopped. We're going to take almost all of these endings and just reuse them. So in almost every case, the only exception is third person plural, where we see pepaukasin, the long alpha. That's the only difference. Those are the indicative forms. For the infinitive, we are going to see kind of a unique form here. It's pepauk enai. And it's just something that has to be remembered and learned. So only two basically new endings. And this is the basic perfect tense. Now, the meaning of the perfect. In Greek, the perfect tense can have the same meaning as the present perfect in English. So it can be used very similarly to how we use the present perfect. For instance, hoiatenaioi tas spondas lelukasin. Now we've got the Athenians, hoiatenaioi, nominative masculine plural. Tas spondas is the feminine accusative plural of the noun sponde, which means really drink libation. And what this came to stand for, though, because you poured out drink libations under certain circumstances, like, for instance, the forming of a treaty, this word in the plural came to mean the treaty itself. And lelukasin is the third person plural perfect tense indicative of the verb lua, which can mean break or destroy or tear apart. So what have the Athenians done? They have broken the treaty. This is the same sort of situation we'd use the present perfect in English. The Athenians have broken the treaty, so now it's time to make them pay. The present bears, the past action, the breaking of the treaty, bears upon the present. It influences what we are going to do now or in the future. Occasionally, and this is where the Greek perfect differs a little bit, or can differ from the English present perfect, the perfect is used in place of the present tense as an intensifier. So, pepisteuka, we see this actually in, I think it's maybe the Gospel of John, somewhere in the Gospels this is taken from. And it's a form of the verb pisteo, I believe, I trust. And it's the perfect tense. We see the reduplication there of the initial consonant, pi. And we also see our kappa at the end of our vowel stem. And then we see the first person singular ending, alpha. And so rather than, we have two different possibilities. We could translate this as I have believed, but also depending on the context, this could just be a really intense I do believe. I do believe. And this is probably the best way to translate this in the particular context in which it comes up in this passage from the Gospels. For the accidents of the verbs we're talking about, the morphology, you can take a look at page 63 for the perfect indicative and the perfect infinitive. Thank you very much.